So, good evening, everyone. I, Aditya, welcome you all at this very interesting session by very popular Swapna Liddle ma'am. Ma'am is an Indian historian, author, art curator, heritage conservator based in Delhi, renowned for her extensive research on the city's history, architecture, and culture. Ma'am has done her BA from St. Stephen's College of Delhi University, MA and MPhil from Center for Historical Studies, JNU, and PhD from Jamia Millia Islamia. Ma'am has been actively involved in heritage conservation, previously serving as the convener of the Delhi chapter of INTAC. She emphasizes the importance of public participation in preserving heritage sites. Ma'am has authored several books, including Shahjahanabad Mapping a Mughal City, Chandni Chowk, the Mughal City of Old Delhi, The Broken Script, Cannot Place and the Making of New Delhi, Delhi 14 Historic Walks, Two Delhis Old and New, and her latest book, I think, co-authored with Madhulika Little Ma'am, Gardens of Delhi. So now we welcome Ma'am to such an engaging session on the from a subaltern perspective on the 1857 revolt. Earlier, I would like to tell my audience that we had honored to host Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, and Sir has told about the subaltern perspective of 1857 revolt of Awadh. So now I would request you all to please hear ma'am and her. This would be a thought-provoking lecture. So over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Aditya, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be a part of this session. And I am always happy to share the history of this city. And this is a subject that is very close to my heart because I think 1857 in Delhi has a very specific character. I know that Professor Mukherjee has talked about 1857 in the context of Awadh, and I'm sure he talked about what happened in the cities there, and as well as the peasants and the soldiers, etc. But I think I still feel that Delhi was different in some ways. And what I found in Delhi, I will talk about using some of the sources that we have for the revolt in Delhi. So a little bit of background of the revolt for those who may not be very familiar with what exactly happened in Delhi. After the revolt had broken out in Meerut on the 10th of May 1857, the soldiers set out for Delhi. They came to Delhi and they asked the Mughal emperor to be their leader. When they came to Delhi and they arrive on the morning of the 11th of May, it takes them a little time. When they first enter, they call on the Mughal emperor and the royal family. It takes them a little while to come on board, shall we say, with this idea. But in a little while, as many people know, I mean, I'm not going to talk about that aspect, but the royal family comes on board. Bahadur Shah becomes the leader of the peasants after they press him to do that. What happens here, I won't again talk about the peasants who are coming. Mostly the soldiers are peasants from the Doab area. But I'm talking about what happens when they come to Delhi, because in Delhi, the people who are the first to join the revolt, actually, even before the soldiers enter the city, the people who join them are from the villages surrounding the city walls, outside the city walls of Delhi. And the city walls, we are talking about what we call Old Delhi, Shahjahanabad. And it is these villages outside, for instance, there are Gujars from the villages of Chandrawal and Wazirabad. There are Mewatis from Jaisinghpura. They are the ones who join the soldiers first. But right from the very beginning, they join the soldiers, but their aims are a little different, because their aims, which are the soldiers, of course, are aiming to turn out the British from the city, but the peasants who joined them, particularly the Gujars and the Mewatis who joined them from the surrounding villages, their aim is also to do a bit of class warfare on the kind of, let's say, the mercantile elite, etc. So what they do is they start to loot the shops, etc., of the suburbs. And the suburbs which are outside the walls of the city: Sabzi Mandi, Teliwada, Rajpura, Pahadi Dheeraj, Jaisinghpura. And what happens eventually is that there is a new regime that is set up in Delhi. And this new regime is also a very interesting regime, because the British are killed, they are thrown out. Here also, what is happening is that you have, once the soldiers enter the city, once the Mughal emperor and the royal family are on board, their first aim is to get rid of the British government. So they actually start killing all the officials who are there, uh, all the people who may seem to be sympathetic to the British cause. The soldiers are doing this. The people who first join them in this also are of the uh, of very particular classes in the city. And what what these soldiers do is, when they come in, they open the jail. So there are some criminal classes who join them. The people, criminals who have been released from the jail, join them. But at the same time, there are the soldiers who were stationed in Delhi, they also joined them. And there are the laboring poor of the city who join them. There are, we know from the, we have newspaper reports, for instance, which come out a little bit after that. These are, about among the laboring poor, you have people who are washermen, water carriers, butchers, they are greengrocers, they are weavers, they are those who are tanners, they are wrestlers. So all these kind of people, they join them. These are the people who are described in the sources and the newspaper reports and the memoirs. They are said that they are the first to join in this revolt against British rule. They are the first to join the soldiers. And what they do is they help the soldiers to identify, because soldiers are coming from outside, they don't know, but they help them to find the British who are hiding in different places, which are the British officials' houses, which are the shops of European or British merchants, to point out all of these and to make sure that this enemy that is there, which is the British, they are neutralized. At the same time, however, these poor people who have now joined the revolt as a sort of, and if you look at the sources of the time, they are calling them a mob. So it is like, it is, they are getting organized also, right? And what they are doing is they also um, use this opportunity to loot the shops and houses of those who they identify as their upper class, whether they are merchants or other service elite, landed elite, any of the elite in the city. These people will, on the pretext that there is some European hiding there or something, they often targeted shops, etc. also. Uh, which of course tells us that, and of course what happens is that when we start reading the newspapers and the memoirs, which are invariably left behind by the elite, they see this as, and the language that is used in these sources is a very negative language, right? It refers to them as badmash, in English translations, it's the riffraff, it's the criminal. So they are criminalized in these memoirs, but actually these are not criminals. They are people who have for a long time been in the lower strata of society, in their society, and therefore they find this opportunity where there is a breakdown of the of uh, order of administration in the city. They find this as an opportunity to go, sort of to get back against the people who have oppressed them for a long time often. So this is what starts to happen. What is their aim? Their aim is not just to loot. They also want to have some amount of upward mobility through this process. So one of the things that we find is that they put on uniforms. They put on uniforms of the soldiers. Now, one aim of putting on a soldier's uniform is that when all this looting is going on, if you are wearing a soldier's uniform, then it is easier to loot because people will not resist a soldier. Because what was happening at this point was the soldiers who have come into the city are also they're looking for food, they're looking for shelter. So they often force shopkeepers to open their shops, to take out food, to take out supplies. They force them. So the so-called mob, when members of that mob, when they decide to put on uniforms, it makes their task of looting these shops easier. But at the same time, that is not their only purpose. Their purpose is also upward mobility, which is to put on uh, uniforms, to get themselves arms, to get themselves swords, to get themselves guns, to get themselves horses, some of them. Um, and what happens is by getting themselves, and how do they get the money to get this? They've got it through the looting, right? They have managed to get money and supplies from the shops of these rich merchants and shopkeepers. They have managed to, the Delhi Bank, which was obviously a bank, that is looted very soon after the revolt breaks out. And many of these people have now got themselves this treasure, which was in the bank. So with all this money, they managed to get themselves the ability to now become an armed force. Now, becoming this armed force, where does that put them in this? What is their position then in this revolt? What is happening in the city is that in the palace, which is the Red Fort, there is the emperor, there is the emperor's sons and grandsons who are a major force in this revolt. At the same time, there are the soldiers, the rebel soldiers who were they are part of, which were part of the East India Company's Bengal Army. And these were the soldiers who had mutinied in Meerut. These are the soldiers who are, some of them had already been stationed in Delhi. And as the revolt went on, many of them came from other parts of India. So these are all soldiers who have come now into Delhi. And within the palace, there they form a new government. This government is a very interesting one also because it's not a simple monarchy. It is very easy to think of 1857 as a revolt where people wanted to restore old rulers. They wanted to restore we've heard all the rulers like the Bijris Qadar from Lucknow, from Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, all that. But It is more than that. It is in Delhi, at least, what is happening is that it is not just that they want that Bahadur Shah Zafar or any other Mughal should just become a ruler, because they actually set up a new kind of administration which is supposed to have representation, which is supposed to be, in fact, they call it a court of administration. That court of administration, which is supposed to advise the emperor. So it is, in modern day terms, in contemporary terms, you would call it like a constitutional monarchy. That you have a monarch, but he does not have absolute powers. He has to be. It is the important decision making is done by councils, by representation. So the idea behind this court of administration, was they would have um, some of the soldiers on that. 50% would be soldiers who would be represented there, heads of various regiments and sections of the army, but at the same time also members of the elite of the city. So this administration, on the one hand, as I said, it consists of two forces. They are the royal family, and at the same time is the elite of the city and the soldiers. So while on the one hand you may think of the soldiers as themselves subaltern, they their position in Delhi is not quite that, because at least the elite among the soldiers are in a position of power in Delhi. So also, another aspect that one must keep in mind is that the company's armies, and when we're talking about these rebel soldiers, we are talking about uh, the company's army, which has now turned against the company, which is now following Bahadur Shah Zafar. And this army was itself, in its social composition, in its caste composition, an elite army. They are peasants, but they are of very specific social background. They are largely Rajputs, Brahmins, Sayyads, Pathans. These are the castes that are recruited into the government's armies. So when you look at the subaltern classes inside the city at this point, they don't see that this army represents them. It's not their army. They might be able to get themselves horses and weapons and uniforms, but where is the place for them inside this army? And therefore, um, they decide to organize on their own. They organize a it's like a regiment that they organize of their own. They organize this. They organize a flag. They and they go out to fight the British, because by this time, so the revolt breaks out on the 11th of May, and by, I think it's the 8th or 9th of June, the British are outside the city walls at a distance. They are on the ridge, and they start to bombard the ridge. There are every now and then there is a skirmish. Soldiers go out from the city, they fight the people on the ridge, people come from the ridge, and there are fights. And in these subaltern classes, these are people who arm themselves and they go out and fight against them. They are not very easily accepted by the other soldiers, by the army, which is the ex-company's army. And they are there. There is always this idea that, how is it that these people, they are spurious soldiers, they should not be accepted. Bahadur Shah Zafar tries his best to accommodate them. He accommodates them by giving recognition to their flag. He actually gives them kettle drums. Kettle drums are like they are like nagada, a nagada, something that is sign of recognition from the ruler, from the emperor, saying that you are also legitimate soldiers. This is you are under me. So to try and kind of incorporate them into the soldier's body. So though they are not accepted fully by the soldiers themselves, but they are getting some kind of legitimacy out of this. So they go out to fight. There are others who are not fighting, and these include women, for instance. They are not soldiers, but they do play a role. They often go out with the army to fight, and when the army fights, if they manage to successfully attack the enemy, they go into the enemy camp, they loot things from the enemy camp. They also act as kind of cheerleaders. Because they are they are encouraging the soldiers, they are encouraging them to bravery, etc. And if they are showing cowardice, they are also sort of at the same time kind of berating them for that. So all of this very complex situation happens in the armed in the army. So the war which happens is a very complex war. Now, this is what is on the side of the war and the army. What is happening in the city? There are other implications of this kind of um, the subaltern classes arming themselves, getting together, getting more resources in their hands. The implication is one very important implication is the upturning of the social order. The established order, which says some people are upper classes and some people are lower classes. This order begins to be challenged. And how is it challenged? So, for instance, it's very simple. What used to happen was that there were people, even in the army, there were the labor of the poor was requisitioned for the war effort, right? So, in fact, the soldiers used to often say, get hold of some people so that they will do digging and they will do carrying of the earth, etc., for the war effort. And they would just go and get people, and invariably they would not get the rich and upper class, they would get laboring people. And these laboring people now are beginning to say, sorry, we will not do this. We are not going to do this. We also have arms. We will be fighters. Why should we be only carrying the earth? Why should we be only digging? And at the same time, because there has been this redistribution of wealth that has happened due to the looting, you have people who are, say, um, people who used to do menial jobs in the city. They used to carry water. We are in a at a time when there was no plumbing in the houses, right? You had to fill water manually or carry water from the well and fill it. So the fillers of water, there are people who clean the streets. There are people who clean, who are carriers of night soil, all that, sanitary workers. All of these people say, many of them, once they get resources, they say, we don't want to do these menial jobs. And they stop doing those menial jobs. And we see it in the newspapers. It is reported that these people have now disappeared. They have disappeared, they have taken money, they've got money, and therefore they are not willing to do these menial jobs. And therefore, there is a problem. The newspaper reports this. One other thing that I must say is that one voice that is even less represented here is that of women. And we do know, however, that some women also find new avenues of liberation. There are cases of elopement. There are cases of at least a couple of women who also disguise themselves as men, as armed soldiers, and try to escape or join the fighting men. So this, to some extent, this is also happening, though we are not getting very much information about this. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what is the response of the elite to all of this that is happening. I've already said that Bahadur Shah Zafar, for instance, gives a little bit, tries to give a bit of space and legitimacy to the armed men who are joining up as soldiers. So he gives a little bit of that. The other thing that you see is some evidence that there is a response from the government, and I'm talking about the government, which is the royal as well as the soldiers are represented here, a response to this challenge, this social challenge, which challenges an emperor's power also. Because the emperor, there is a very interesting letter. The police chief of the city was the Kotwal, and his deputy addresses on the 27th of July, he addresses a letter to all the thanedars. You know, the city is divided into different thanas, different police station jurisdictions. And the thanedars are sent this letter by the deputy Kotwal, who says that so far in all your letters, you have been addressing the emperor as Hazrat Jahapana, which means your exalted majesty. But he says from now on, you are to address him as Garib Parvar Salamat, the protector of the poor. So there is a recognition that the role of the emperor has to change. He is not an exalted majesty. He is the protector of the poor. He's getting his legitimacy from his ability to protect the poor. If he's not protecting the poor, his legitimacy will be challenged. So there is this subtle idea that the government is responding to this. The regime is responding to this. The emperor has to respond to this kind of challenge. So this is the response of the regime. What about the elite of the city? Now, the elite of the city, we are talking about whether they are rich merchants, whether they are the landed elite, whether they are the service elite, you know, those who had been in the company's judicial service or civil service or whatever. This is the elite which is the most conservative element in the city because they are very doubtful about the rebel soldiers who have come from outsiders. For them, they see them as outsiders, they see them as peasants, they see them as people who are culturally not like us, right? And so they are very doubtful of that. Even more so, they are scared by the social upturning of the social order that is happening. So they are extremely doubtful about that. They are extremely they feel that if this goes on, then we don't know what will happen. If the British are finally vanquished, they are completely thrown out from this country. What do we have in its turn? Will we have a situation where the Mughal emperor comes back? It doesn't look like it because the Mughal emperor seems to be only a part of the equation. There are these soldiers and there are these subaltern classes who have now arisen and who have gained a little bit more power. So the regime that we might have after this will not be so favorable to us. And according to me, and a lot of historians, I think, have overlooked this when they talk about Delhi. And during the course of the revolt, one aspect that I have not touched upon, and many historians touch upon, or have actually touched upon, some of the prominent historians, I won't say many historians, I would say some of the prominent historians have talked about a religious divide in the city. And I think that that religious divide is actually a bit of a red herring in Delhi. It's not so obvious. The biggest divide in Delhi during the revolt of 1857 is a class divide because there is this strong divide between the elite whether the mercantile landed service elite, who are totally against the revolt, most of them, with a very few exceptions. They are mostly against the revolt. And the third is, of course, the regime itself, which is, of course, for the revolt, but against too much of a social disruption. And there are the subaltern classes who are for the revolt, as well as being for a sort of social reordering of the system. And because the elite plays such a conservative role in this, because they withdraw their support from the revolt, they don't give their they hold back their support from the revolt. They don't support it. That is one of the reasons why Delhi eventually falls in September. In September, the revolt is over. The British come back. And though, of course, the revolt goes on in other places after that, but in Delhi, it is over in September. So, lastly, I would like to make a few comments on how we recover the voices of the subaltern in a moment like this. It is difficult because a lot of the our information comes from elite sources. It comes from letters written by the court. It comes from memoirs, again written by very literate literary elite. It comes from the poetry, which is again written by an elite class of people. And what we can do is to read these sources in a way which to look for what subaltern classes are doing, how they are perceived. By seeing how the elite perceive them, we get an idea of what are the kinds of things that are happening in the city and what is the position of the subaltern classes. I want to give an example of a passage of poetry. And so this is a poem that was written after the revolt was over, and it was written by a man called Muhammad Zahur. And though it is, I mean, it's a poem which shows so well the kind of anxieties that the elite had about the social upheaval, that they saw it as a social upheaval, right? Because their position is being challenged. So I'll just say these verses and I'll translate it as I go. It says, Sada tanur jhoke tha jo ladka naan bai ka. He says, that street cook's lad who did nothing but stoke the fire. So, in those days also, on this, there were these street food stalls, etc. So that cook who is cooking food on the street, the fire, the small boy who actually his only job is to light the fire and to keep the fire going. Sada tanur jhoke tha jo ladka naan bai ka, भरा है इसके सर में अब तो सौदा मीरजाई का. So this boy who only used to stoke the fire now thinks that he's a Mirza, which means that he thinks that he is something. He feels that he has risen in life, right? Karoli बांध के निकले है लड़का कसाई का. So it says that the son of the butcher now goes around wearing a hunting knife. So hunting was a very elite pastime, right? So what they're saying is that butchers were fairly low down in the social hierarchy. And if a butcher's son now thinks that he is he is also a nobleman, and therefore he's going around with a hunting knife because it's a very elite pastime. And he says, Amiron ke barabar baithe hai farzand da'i ka. So the son of the midwife who used to help women give birth, again, occupation that is considered socially on the lower rungs. And this son of a dai, Amiron ke barabar baithe hai farzand da'i ka. So this son of the midwife now sits on the same level as a nobleman. So what is happening is you have And this is only one representative of the kind of poetry that was written. But there was other, all sorts of other poetry also, which laments the loss of power and prestige from the upper classes, from the privileged classes, and a sense of anxiety about the upturning of this of the social order, the underprivileged rising up and challenging the social order, rising up and attaining higher positions. That kind of uh, anxiety is there, which you see in the poetry, in the memoirs. So I would say that when you look at 1857 in Delhi, it is a very complex situation. And I think often the role of the subaltern classes in how how the revolt is carried on, of course, but also it represents a worldview that is different, a desire for a future that is going to be different, which is not going to be a monarchy. It is going to have a greater equality. All of those things which we forget that, or forget. I mean, because subaltern voices are so hard to recover, people have not talked about this aspect of the revolt much. But I think that this is a very important part of the revolt. So I think I'll just wrap up here and give people a chance to ask questions if they have any questions, and we can talk a little further. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much, ma'am, for this enlightening lecture. That is, the subaltern perspective is often, missing from a perspective which often missing in all the accounts or most of the accounts that is available with respect to 1857. So I have few questions to ask, if you allow.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So I just want to know that were they soldiers that they were engaged, they have come from Meerut. Were these soldiers engaged in doing atrocities on the subaltern classes? As you mentioned about looting. So were they engaged in any other kind of atrocities on subaltern classes?
They were not. The soldiers had very simple aims. One is get rid of the British. That is one aim. The other aim and that involves killing the British. The other aim is to be able to get enough money, food, all the kind of things that they need to keep this war going, right? For that, they loot the houses and shops of or they try to extract. They don't always loot. What they do is they try to to pressurize the merchants, open your shop, give us supplies, etc. They ask rich people to give them loans. So all that is directed towards the rich. As far as the poor are concerned, they have only their labor, right? They have only their labor to give. So the soldiers are not really doing atrocities as such, but what they're doing is they're forcing the poor to give their labor. They will say, hame ye, we are doing this, we have to dig a trench for the warfare. Le aao logo ko, bring them, make them dig the earth, right? So what they do is this kind of thing. So I would not say that they are atrocities, but it is forced labor. Yeah.
And the second question I want to ask,
Yeah.
it is often absent that the soldiers, the atrocities they did on British women and children. I was reading your book, Broken Scripts, and you talked about the atrocities that were being done. So I just want, if you could tell us more about the atrocities done on the British women and children by the soldiers.
Uh, again, what I feel is that this idea of for the soldiers, they feel that um, anybody who is either British or is sympathetic to them is their enemy, and I can see why they feel that, right? Because they are not going to be for the revolt, so they do kill them, but They are not, so they kill them. And in later accounts, the British exaggerated the kind of cruelty that was meted out. So in the British accounts, there are, for instance, it is claimed that all these women were raped and they were tortured and all that. We don't have any. We don't have any evidence of that happening. It was, in fact, they were killed, but there was not any particularly severe cruelties that were um, applied. So therefore, that is part of British propaganda later. But yeah, but of course, yes, they were killed, definitely.
And third, I want to talk about upward mobility.
Mm.
So, it's quite difficult to believe that they were engaged in. So, I was just thinking that, ma'am, if you could tell us more about upward mobility.
Yeah. So it's very simple. For the poor, it is so difficult for them in normal times to get upward mobility, right? How do you, but when the 1857 is a time of crisis for a regime. And in this moment of crisis, there is this forcible redistribution of wealth that is happening. There is redistribution happening simply because the regime has broken down. The previous regime has broken down. There is disorder. And the subaltern classes take advantage of this period of crisis in the regime in order to forcibly redistribute wealth. This forcible redistribution of wealth enables the upward mobility and the ability to become, for instance, from somebody who's a sweeper can become a soldier. It's a huge upward step for them. So that kind of upward mobility is what there is for a small period of time, there is the possibility of that upward mobility during the revolt.
And we have got one question from the audience. I would like to pose it to you.
Yeah,
The person want to ask the idea of nation that the sepoys had in their mind.
yeah, yeah. So, the idea of nation is slowly forming at this point. You know, we must realize today we think of India as a nation, its boundaries. The idea of nationhood is a fairly new one, right? Because in earlier times, you saw yourself as the inhabitant of a particular place and as the subject of a particular ruler. So you are a part of you reside in the territories of such and such ruler, and you live in this village. You might be living in this pargana, you might be living in this kingdom. But the idea of nationalism, to fight for your nation, this is something that is slowly developing. There is there are books that have been written on this, and in the broken script I have mentioned this. I mean, I didn't go into this aspect too much just now, but yes, there are ideologues. And when I said that most of the elite are against the revolt, not all of them. There are some who are for the revolt also. And one of them is somebody called Bakir. Muhammad Bakir was the editor of the Delhi Urdu Akhbar, and he writes these editorials. And in his writings, for instance, that's one of the places where you can see these ideas of nationalism coming in. The fact that we are a people who can be diverse, who can be from different religions, from different regions, but we have a common cause. We see ourselves as Indians, and we are against the British. And a lot of Indian nationalism does develop in the context of an anti-British movement, right? National movement, and that's why we call it our freedom movement is also our national movement. But I didn't go into it on this particular talk, but there's a lot of interesting reading on that.
So the last question I want to ask is for this talk. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So you just talk about Naki that women cross-dressed like men to escape. And were there any other methods they were using to for escaping?
Uh, I think what was happening was that some of them were eloping, right? So there were two contexts in which elopements happened. Uh, First of all, some of them were eloped with soldiers who had come from outside. So they eloped with them. Some of them eloped with some unspecified people, but while their husbands had gone off to war, right? So what is happening is that because of this disorder, they are getting opportunities to probably escape unhappy marriages, which otherwise they would not have that opportunity. But here, because husbands are otherwise occupied or there are more opportunities, they do that. We have just very few, just a couple of instances of women actually aspiring to be soldiers. I mean, they dress as soldiers. So whether it is simply to escape or to actually fight in the war, that also there is one case which it is said that one woman dressed up as a man, and she then was not only fighting but was encouraging other people to fight also. So that is a very unusual case. And let me tell you, this was not by the when one of these women, when she was caught in the clothes of a soldier by their own side, not by the British side, but by the Indian soldiers, they were not happy about this, right? They said, you must not do this again, and other women shouldn't do that. So there's a proclamation which is issued that no women must do this. So there is anxiety that, next time, if more women start doing this, then it will give them power, which will not be a great idea in the long term. So there is anxiety that women are also, stepping out of their ordained roles.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much for this lecture.
Thank you
And
so much.
please make history more accessible to the people. And as it is always alleged that academic history is quite boring. So thank you for making it more accessible to the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been